Three. Hello, well, welcome everyone to all of you for the very first podcast of this year. And today I have one of the most sought after natural bodybuilding coach with me, Cliff Wilson. Hi, Cliff. How are you?
I'm good. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. In fact, I was going through your book, and it's an amazing insightful about the entire bodybuilding arena. Anybody who has slightest of interest into bodybuilding, not even competing, but how to diet down, what are the categories, how can anybody compete, what are the classes, which is non-drug, drug competitors, each and everything has been written with such finesse in that book. That's amazing.
Oh, I appreciate it. When I first started writing it, I actually just intended to write it as a small, short, but then it kept growing and growing as I was
Hmm.
writing it. I was like, well, I can't talk about this without talking about that, and then it just kept growing. Before I
Absolutely.
knew it,
Yeah.
I had a monster, and then I was like, well, maybe we should just actually legitimately publish this book, and so it's grown into something that I didn't anticipate.
Uh-huh. That's fabulous. So, in fact, for the people who don't know you quite well, who is Cliff Wilson?
Yeah, I've been. I'm one of the lucky ones. I've been
Uh-huh.
coaching full time for 11 years now, and I've been
Awesome.
coaching in total 13 years. I work
Mhm.
with largely bodybuilders. I only take on a few non bodybuilders per year every year. If you want to know how long I've been doing this, I've been doing this since before Instagram.
Oh,
Yeah, that's how long I've been coaching, since
yeah,
before
yeah.
Instagram. But yeah, I started this job simply because I love bodybuilding.
Hmm.
I didn't really, there weren't a lot of people coaching when I started coaching. I just knew that I liked coaching and I wanted to help other people compete.
Hmm.
um, and I thought I had new things to say on the subject, and
Hmm.
so I started that. And before I knew it, I had a business going, and I've been doing it ever since. And I've been fortunate to work with some really great athletes over the years.
Hmm.
And to date, I've coached. Oh man, over 100 pro title winners,
Oh my
17
God.
world champions, and somewhere around 140 pro card winners. So I've been very fortunate to work with some great athletes over the last decade.
That's a huge scorecard full of accolades and medals and trophies. Yeah. What do you
Yeah,
like?
yeah. One thing I always tell my clients. Oh, yeah.
Hmm.
One thing I always tell my clients though is, to the people on the outside, the trophies and the wins always seem really nice, but it's always just the side effect of what we do. It's not even what we aim to do. We aim to do good work, and then the side effect is the
Hmm.
victory.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree with you. On an average, how many clients do you take during a year?
At any given time, depending on, because also it depends on the experience level of the clients.
Hmm.
One thing I always say is that when I work with someone, I heavily invest in them. So when I decide to work with someone, I'm not stopping working with them until they decide our time is up. So
Oh.
sometimes that could be years.
Hmm.
Um, I have a lot of clients that I've worked with for 5 to 8, 9 years. And so when I've worked with somebody for a long time, the amount of time that I need to put into them is less because, they've asked most of the questions they're going to have to need to
Hmm.
ask. Um, so it could be anywhere from 60 clients to 90 clients at a time, just depending on the experience level
Oh my
of the
God,
people
that's
that I'm
quite a
working
bit.
with. Yeah,
And
yeah. I don't often take 90. I would say usually it probably settles somewhere between, maybe 70 and 80 clients at any given
hmm.
time.
Hmm. So do you personally handle them, or do you have a team who look after the clients?
I personally handle them.
Oh.
I get that question a lot. I get that question a lot. They ask if I have like a coaching team or anything like that. I don't. It's just me and my my wife Haley is also like my. I would say she's kind of like my manager. I believe maybe you
Yeah,
spoke to
yeah,
her as well.
yeah.
Yeah, Haley helps me find when people apply to work with me. She helps me find the good people. She helps me with like video stuff. She helps me with book editing. She helps me with scheduling speaking engagements. Like she
Uh-huh.
really helped. She does all. I think sometimes when people have like a coaching team,
Mm-hmm.
they do that because they have all this other business stuff to tend to. But Haley focuses on a lot of the other side stuff so that I can just focus on coaching.
That's so amazing. That's such an amazing supportive family that you have.
Yeah, yeah, I'm lucky. I'm a lucky guy.
Yeah, you mentioned that. You mentioned that. Okay. So, what made you come into bodybuilding? You always wanted to be a bodybuilding coach, or you competed first? You saw that you love the journey. You have quite of information and knowledge about it. That's when you thought, or you saw that there is a lot of money in coaching. That brought you to coaching. What is that?
you, you know, so back when I did my first show in 2008,
Oh.
and there weren't a lot of people coaching back then. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, I only knew of like two people that were really coaching, like Chad Nichols, who was coaching Ronnie Coleman, who
Yeah.
had coached Ronnie Coleman. Uh, but even he wasn't really doing it online, I don't believe, at that time. Then there was like Lane Norton
Mm-hmm.
and Dr. Joe Klemzeski. They were kind of
Yeah.
the only ones that were really coaching. And I didn't really believe that I had the credentials to coach.
Mm-hmm.
I had not, for my competition, my first one in 2008. I was just studying. I'm kind of a bodybuilding nerd. I was just studying for my own information, and so I would order. I would read textbooks. I would order subscriptions to uh, endocrinology studies and and publications and things like that. And I would just read them for my own information. And I got into coaching accidentally, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest. I had done my first show, and I was at the gym one day with a friend of mine, and I saw a guy in the gym
Mm-hmm.
who had obviously great genetics. You can spot great genetics when you see him.
Yeah.
And but it was also clear that he didn't know what he was doing. He was doing a couple of exercises that didn't really make sense. And I told my friend, I said, "Man, if I had that guy's genetics, nobody'd be able to stop me." And he goes, "You should find out." And he walks over
Mm-hmm.
and he says, "Do a bodybuilding show. My friend will help you."
Oh.
And and the guy just goes, "Oh, that sounds cool. Let's do that." So, I wasn't charging him. We just became training partners, and I would
Mm-hmm.
help him with his diet. I would do his diet for him. We would train together. And then we were in the gym one day, and he saw another guy that had even better genetics than he did.
Oh.
And "Man," he goes, "you look really good." He goes, "I'm doing a bodybuilding show." He goes, "You should do it with me." He goes,
Mm-hmm.
"My friend over here will help you." And so before I knew it, I had two guys I was just helping.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't charging them anything. I had, I didn't think I was qualified. I knew that I was knowledgeable, but I didn't know if I was qualified to coach.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I was just helping these two guys, and they took the one guy won Mr. Natural Illinois
Oh
at his
man.
first show in 2009, and
Oh
then
man. Oh man.
the other guy took runner up, and,
Oh.
and then when they did well, I started having more people locally just ask, "Hey, can you help me? Can you help me?"
Mm-hmm.
And also that it got around that they were doing things quite differently. I was doing a lot of things differently than other people back then.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff that's more common now, but I was doing a lot of things differently back then, and I just had more and more people asking. And then finally, once I got up to around 10 people I was helping, I was like, I need to start charging.
Yeah.
I was like,
Absolutely.
this is taking a lot of time. I need to start charging money. And even when I started charging, I was like, all right, everybody just pay me $30 a month. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, whatever, just $30 a month, and everyone's like, okay, fine, $30 a month, and then after another year and a half, finally, I was like, I told my wife at the time, I was like, I think I need to quit my job. I was like, I
Mm-hmm.
can't take on any more clients if I don't quit my job.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even make a lot of money that first year because I wasn't charging a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think I only made enough. I probably didn't even make enough to pay my bills that first year, but I got into it just because I enjoyed it and I loved it, and I was good at it, and before I knew it, I just had a growing business, and I've been doing it ever since.
Great, great to know that. So you mentioned that you, at that point in time, you were doing things differently, which are now common. So what were those things?
Well, back then, not many people were drinking water.
Mm-hmm.
Going into their contest, they'd cut out water 24 hours beforehand, and that's just going to make you look worse.
Mm-hmm.
And they would just stop. They would dehydrate themselves. So first off, I was not doing that. I was having people drink water going into the show, and I remember sometimes my clients would bring their jug of water into the contest, and people backstage would be like, "Oh my gosh, did you give up already? Why are you drinking water?" So that was one thing. The other thing is I was doing very aggressive carbohydrate loading.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Like how
uh,
much?
you know, well, depending on how I structured it, but sometimes, like the first show I went into, I had the guy eating, 400 grams of carbs pretty much the entire week going into the show. And then I switched up my I switched up my peak strategy the following year, even. And I had one method where I would have people consume like 1,000 grams of carbs the day before the show,
Oh my God.
with like yeah, and like 3 gallons of water. And so people were shocked at those numbers. And then the other thing too was just bringing in people very very lean. um, I think the biggest thing is that bodybuilding has traditionally been you get big, of course, and you aim to get lean. But one of the things that I was doing was that not everybody is the biggest guy. Not everybody
Mm-hmm.
has the genetics to be the biggest guy on stage, and not everybody
Mm-hmm.
has the most beautiful structure or symmetry. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, if I was prepping somebody, and they weren't the biggest, or they didn't have the best shape, I'm like, well, we can't get you much bigger for this show because
Mm-hmm.
you can only grow so fast, especially as a natural bodybuilder. We
Mm-hmm.
can't change your genetically set structure. So the only thing we can do right now is get you so lean, maybe you can overcome the bigger guys or the better shaped guys. So,
Yeah.
back then, a lot of guys, they even the guys that would have lines in their glutes,
Mm-hmm.
they would kind of stop once they saw the first lines, the real faint glute lines. But I was like, if you just come in at the same conditioning as everybody else, you're not going to beat them.
Yep.
So I kind of convinced my clients, let's push to a new level and let's get just totally shredded, because at least one phrase I would use to my clients all the time is, um, my client here that is he's not as big as everyone else, and this other guy, right? If you just get as lean as this guy, then
Mm-hmm.
you're making it easy on the judges because they're comparing apples to bigger apples. I was like, let's get totally shredded, make it hard on the judges. So
Mm-hmm.
now they have to compare apples to oranges.
Yep.
I was like,
Absolutely.
don't make them compare apples to bigger apples. Let's give them
Uh-huh.
something completely different to look at. So
Yeah.
those were different things that I was kind of doing at the time, and over
And
the years,
you,
I think I've done a few things differently.
talking this, how long back this was the thing?
Those are probably in the early days of my coaching career. I would say 2010 to 2012 or 13.
Okay.
Even after that, I started changing things around. Like I was one of the first guys to tell people not to do hit cardio. It was real popular in the bodybuilding community. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think hit cardio is good. So I guess I've always kind of tried to like do things. I always change the way I do things, but I've always tried to not just do things the way I've always done them because that's the way it's always been done. So I've always just tried to like, keep improving, but oftentimes that leads to me doing things a little bit differently than what everyone's doing at the time.
So let me tell you, you're just saying that this was something which you learned at that time, which is somewhere about, say, 10 to 12 or maybe 15 years back. But still, there are athletes that I know actually are in this dilemma. They run into comp days, they run into competition days with 24 or more hours without water.
Yeah.
They are actually on, say, less than 50 grams or 100 grams of carbs, I think, for more than 2, 3 weeks. But in fact, and I'm amazed when you're saying this that back then you were coaching in a way that you are not of this mindset, and still you were able to bring your athletes that lean that they could stand out from the competition. That's commendable. And as much
Yeah,
as 1,000 plus grams of carbs, oh my God, I cannot thank you enough.
well, I think that I think the problem is that when they go with dehydration methods,
Hmm.
it's because they only have like a base level of understanding of how the body processes things like carbohydrates and water.
Hmm.
Water is not the enemy. Water being stored in your body is not the problem. Water being stored in the wrong places in the body is the problem. It's not a question of should do you want water within your body, but you want to set up the body to make sure it's stored within the muscle, not under the
Hmm.
skin. And
Absolutely.
if you work with your body on that, the ratios actually favor it to be stored in the muscle tissue. But I think that people try to do too many things that they don't understand what they're doing, and then they mess everything up. I mean, same goes with sodium, right? That people I think they sometimes get a base understanding. A lot of guys reduce sodium. I'm sure a lot of guys
Yep.
that cut sodium out before the show because they just know sodium causes water retention. That's like then they think, oh, and sodium stored largely outside of the muscle tissue. So they're like, just get rid of sodium and you'll be fine. But what they don't understand is sodium is also a primary controller of blood volume.
Absolutely.
Everyone's eaten a salty meal and then gotten a great pump, right? So, it's just about like finding the right amounts and in the right ratios for each person. And then once you do that, then you can really maximize how someone looks. But I think that people just, they just think everything is good or bad, and keep the good things and get rid of the bad things entirely. But it's not
Yeah.
quite so simple.
Actually, what also happens, Cliff, that people do not want to spend time on educating themselves. They do not understand the rationale of it. So they see that they are holding water and now they want to get rid of it as soon as possible. So one reason, like cutting sodium, not even understanding the hormone aldosterone and the function of it, and then they would think of, say, uh, having any sort of agent, any sort of diuretic agent that can flush out water from their body as soon as possible. That's not the way that you're calling some devil in your body at that point in time. If in case you are, like, say, abusing your body at that time. So your body naturally will not look beautiful. You will look dehydrated and soft.
Yeah, I kind of always say I always take that as it's really similar. I call it the symptomatic approach. You're right.
Hmm.
They see that they're holding water under the skin, and then they're like, I just need to get rid of the water.
Yeah.
Uh and it's kind of like someone that has, I mean, genetic issues aside, but someone that, is obese and they have issues with cholesterol, right? Their
Hmm.
cholesterol is high. They're like, well, I'll just take the cholesterol medication rather than cleaning up their diet and losing weight.
Yep.
It's the exact same thing. It's the symptomatic approach. Well, I've got this issue. I'll just pop that down. But then, of course, what's going to happen is something else is going to come up and be an issue. Where if you treat the root of the problem, which is why is your water retention issue with your water intramuscular to extra muscular water ratio off, why is it skewed,
Hmm.
treat the issue, not just the symptom.
Exactly, exactly. And in fact, you are absolutely right. So, one of the major, and I would say the biggest issue in competition prep is around manipulation of sodium, utilization of carbs at right point in time, and getting rid of water, as you said, from the right spots. From the right spots. Majority of bodybuilding coaching and the diet protocols and each and everything revolves around these things, because you have to get into the leanest shape possible with the maximum amount of muscle tissue that you can hold to look beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, and what's another thing too is even like throughout the entire contest prep, um bodybuilders bodybuilders are a hardworking demographic.
Yeah.
You know, nobody would argue that. Everybody who chooses to be a bodybuilder, they enjoy hard work. There's a reason they
Mhm.
get into it. But sometimes I think that that mindset can be a detriment, you know,
Mhm.
because more work, harder work is not always better, especially when it comes to issues of the body. Because you said it just now is we need to maintain muscle mass.
Yeah.
But if our bodies are physiologically stressed and pushed to the limit or beyond the limit, I guess I should say, is that that's not a conducive environment for retention of muscle mass. You know, we're
Yeah.
not, you know, people try to lose weight too quickly and they try to do too much cardio, too few calories, you know, strip away the water, no sodium. I mean, that's not an environment. You know, essentially
Definitely.
you're like pushing his body to the breaking point. That's not a an environment where your body's like, yeah, let's hold on to all this muscle tissue. No, your
Mhm.
body's stressed and inflamed and in a bad situation. But I think that's where, once again, the bodybuilding mindset of I'll be the hardest worker can work against you because you know the hardest worker is not always the one that wins. It's the smartest
The
worker
smartest
that's
worker.
also willing to work hard.
Yeah. Absolutely. And actually, you know what we get caught into? We get caught into the always focusing on the anabolism of body and constantly thinking about to not actually focus on catabolism. But they don't understand that constantly focusing on catabolism is also giving a stress to your body, which in itself is a catabolic state.
Yeah, yeah. You know, that's a great point because you know, I sometimes I'll also tell people some bodybuilders and probably catch hell for saying this, but some bodybuilders do what I would say they overtrack their metrics. And what I mean by that is, yes, during peak week, I do have my clients track. You know, we get real specific about our food choices. We track
Mhm.
protein, carbs, and fat. We track sodium. We track potassium, water. You know,
Mhm.
step counts, cardio. You know, all we're tracking everything. But in the heart of your off season, when you're trying to build muscle, I do think that it can be problematic, you know, for trying to for months at a time track every single metric, because I do think that at a certain point a stressor. You know,
Yeah,
it's like you need
it
to be
does.
really careful about it. You know, I think any nobody is going to for years on end in the off season, even months,
Mhm.
track every single day. You know, I think usually in the off season it's comfortable tracking protein, carbs, and fat.
Yeah,
That's right. You know, great. But when you're trying to like, oh, I'm going to measure my sleep every night and my sodium every day and my potassium and I'm going to measure my step counts every single day, and you know, they're like obsessively tracking all of these
absolutely.
metrics. And I'm like, you know, at some point you just need to exist and relax
Yeah.
because I think that the obsession of over tracking these metrics is going to cause you more harm than benefit because you're stressing over it.
Absolutely, it does. It does. And actually, in fact, it is always a thing that I've realized talking to athletes and also to few of the coaches that we overemphasize on dieting, on the prep, on exercise, on the protein, and we underemphasize on the importance of hydration, on the importance of having a calm mind, or importance of having a good sound sleep and rest days. We always
Yeah,
undermine them.
the not very exciting stuff. The not
Yeah,
very exciting stuff, right?
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and especially the young competitors, they don't want to
yeah,
hear about that stuff at all.
yeah.
um, you know, I mean, but interesting. I just read a new study that came out, and it doesn't relate to bodybuilding, but essentially people that drink a lot of water
Mm-hmm.
um, appear younger as they age.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's interesting. It's not tracking muscle mass, but I mean, people appearing younger also shows some improved recovery overall, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm willing to bet that there's a play on muscle mass over the course of years as well. But uh, you know, a good night's sleep and low stress. It is so hard, and you know, pretty intensively with my athletes. You know, this is kind of a side note, but there's a point to it. I promise. It's like I'm constantly bombarded with offers from business coaches.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, well, they're like, we hear you, maybe like you asked how many clients I'll work with, and they're like, well, we hear you work with, only 75. We'll teach you how to streamline your process, and you can work with 150 athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And um, and I'm like, I'm not going to streamline this process because the lack of streamlining is why I've been able to be good at what I do, is because it's intensive what I do. I have a lot of conversations with my clients. I work through email because most of my clients are not in the US. And I think email is a good way to like itemize things. But I have a lot of back and forth conversations with my clients because
Mm-hmm.
you can't fix someone's stress levels, sleep, psychological improvement. You can't do that through a streamlined process because everybody is stressed for different reasons. Everybody
Absolutely.
can't sleep for different reasons. And so it's such a nuanced, valuable process of trying to figure out why you're stressed, why you can't sleep, and even the stress level of how to fit bodybuilding within.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So I think I was talking about oh, so it's like an intensive process working with why someone can't sleep, or like such a big part of bodybuilding. I mean, people always want to know, especially younger competitors. We talk about they
Mm-hmm.
tend to focus on the wrong thing, but they want to know, what's someone's diet like, what's their training like. Um, but I guess the bigger question in the long run when I work with athletes is, yeah, I'll give them their diet and their training, but then the guidance really comes in of like, how do you make that work over the long run?
Mm-hmm.
What happens when your wife and your kids want to go out to eat? How do you manage that situation? How detailed do you need to be when your next show isn't for 2 years? you
Mm-hmm.
know, how detailed do you need to be when your next show is in 8 weeks? Because those are different levels of precision.
Mm-hmm.
So, a big part of coaching is, how do you get the athlete to do enough to make optimal progress without having them stress about what needs to be done? And how do you tailor that for the appropriate time length for when their show is?
That's an art. That's an art.
Yes. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's different for everybody. I have one client who, when he started working with me, he was kind of at his wit's end. He's like, I haven't been out to eat in 4 years.
Oh my God.
Because I don't want to mess up my bodybuilding,
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't making great progress because he was stressed out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously, he,
Yeah.
it didn't make a lot of room for relationships or family or friends. And I'm like, you are harming yourself.
Yeah.
Like, go out to eat once in a while with your family, and life will get easier.
Absolutely.
And so, it's and then you get other people, they're like, well, I go out to eat like 3-4 times a week, and I'm like, all right, we got to reel that in now. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's reduce that a little bit here. And so
Yeah.
you bring everybody to the appropriate spot, but that's where coaching comes in.
And what also happened that with overindulgence of internet and availability of information on every platform, what people will do that they'll not reduce their stressors, but they will try and pop in some ashwagandha, magnesium, melatonin, and they think that they will reduce the stress. Having adaptogens all the time will not reduce your stress if in case you in yourself are not setting a routine to yourself and seeing what is causing you stress.
Yeah. Well, once again, I think there's a time and a place for something like melatonin, but that's where,
Yeah.
if you, it's like, if you're relying solely on that, then once again,
Yeah.
that's like we talked about with the other subjects, is you're like treating the symptoms, not the
Yeah.
cause.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, and so it's one of those things where I think sleep aids can help, especially if you've had like just a rough day, something like that. But if you don't treat the root causes, which once again a lot of people don't want to do because that's
Yeah,
long, intensive
that's
work.
long.
Yeah, yeah. And but I never try to like overstep my bounds as a coach, but it's like you always want to be like, hey, if your relationships in your life are causing you stress, you need to go face that. You need to go deal with that. You can't just keep shoving it to the side and pretend like it's not an issue.
Hmm. Okay. So there is a very interesting question, Cliff. that you primarily coach natural athletes, right?
I would say about 70% of my clients are natural, maybe 30% enhanced.
Yeah. And I have, in fact, as I said, that very limited information. In fact, I think majority of people have very limited information on how comp prep and how the bodybuilding is done for natural athletes, because everybody, if you in case you see, would want to see big arms, in fact, v taper and big huge legs, big, in fact, a back, and that is enhanced bodybuilding. But not many people will understand what kind of say effort and information it takes to actually get so lean into a natural bodybuilding competition. So, would you tell us, in fact, how the natural, say, comp prep works for you, for your athletes, how the exercise goes, how the diet goes, how long it should be, if in case any sort of drugs are involved, if at all, with any client, in fact, when should they be introduced, what are the protocols, maybe something of that sort, so that people also understand, because natural bodybuilding is an art and is also a beauty, that in fact what you learn at that point in time, that is something which you can carry for your life, those
Yeah,
sort of,
yeah.
yeah.
It's really interesting because you're right. A lot of people don't have an idea about the differences between
Yeah.
natural versus enhanced. And I do coach both, so I have, I'm a natural competitor myself, but I
Yeah.
coach both, so I have an in-depth knowledge of both. Um, One thing I'll say from an aspect of diet and training and the process, natural bodybuilding and enhanced bodybuilding are similar in a lot of ways. The
Mm-hmm.
biggest differences are going to be that the timelines for enhanced bodybuilding are faster.
Yeah.
Um, the end result is obviously more dramatic,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of things that you do are more aggressive with diet and training. So what I mean when I say all that is, um, for a natural bodybuilder, you're going to want to lose fat slowly because your body will quickly discard lean tissue
Mm-hmm.
as a natural competitor if you lose weight too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but for an enhanced competitor, you can still sacrifice fullness if you go too fast, but you can go faster
Mm-hmm.
with fat loss with an enhanced competitor. You can lose 2-3 pounds a week, and you're not really going to give up much muscle tissue or any really because you're taking compounds that will um, prevent that from happening.
Yeah.
So you can just go faster. For a natural bodybuilder, you can build muscle, but it's going to be painfully slow. After you've been training 5 years, 4 or 5 years, maybe a pound or probably a pound, maybe two of muscle per year. Uh, Enhanced competitor, you're probably putting on 3-4 pounds, for a cycle that they'll use. So,
Mm-hmm.
you need to rethink your timelines. Before we turned the camera on, we were talking about how sometimes people will come to me and they're like, "Well, I'm a natural bodybuilder and I want to put on, you know, 10 pounds of muscle." And I'll say, "Well, how long have you been training?" They're like, "Oh, about 6 years." And I'm like, "Well, all right, it'll take about 10 years, maybe 10 years to put on." And they're like, "What?" And I'm like, "Well, that's just the realities of it." Natural bodybuilding is much more of a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
Enhanced bodybuilding is much more of a sprint,
Yep.
or at least a middle distance run.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and so, choosing the natural bodybuilding route, you need to get used to those absurd timelines. I actually think that in natural bodybuilding, um, effort, of course, matters, but I would actually say consistency and endurance are going to rank maybe even more highly than effort
Yeah.
over the long run. Um, so with that knowledge, I think that's important. Now with diet and training, once again, those kind of reflect in what I just said. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like if you're in a fat loss phase, if you're enhanced, you can cut calories lower way because you don't have to worry as much about tissue loss. If you're in a
Mm-hmm.
gaining phase, you can add more calories, you can eat more because more of the weight you gain is going to be muscle and not fat.
Yep.
Um, Training, your recovery is enhanced, so you can train more and harder. You you can take more sets to failure. You can do more volume as an enhanced competitor. So just everything is the same, just faster and more, you know?
Hmm.
And so that's the hardest part, I think, with natural bodybuilding is that a lot of people they have inaccurate timelines in their head about how fast this stuff should come.
Hmm.
And so part of my job as a coach is expectation management, you know.
That's
And
very
I think
important.
that, yeah, yeah, you know, and I think that that's an interesting part of my job because uh, I think a lot of people anticipate that as their coach, when they say they want to gain 10 pounds of muscle, they expect to hear their coach be like, all right, this time next year, you're going to have the 10 pounds of muscle. And they're kind of taken back when I say, well, that's going to be a decade long project, you know?
Uh-huh.
And sometimes they want to fight me on this. And I always kind of like remind them, like, you know, it'd be great for my business if I could have you gain 10 pounds of muscle in a year. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like,
Yep.
I would be that guy. I'd have people just flocking to me from around the world if I could have you do that after you've been training for, you know, 6, 7 years.
Hmm.
Um, you know, a new lifter can do that, right? A new trainee can gain 10 pounds of muscle in a year for sure. Um, but uh, but my job as a coach is to give you accurate depictions of what this process is going to look like. Because if I promise you that you'll gain 10 pounds of muscle in a year and you only gain 1 pound
Hmm.
of muscle in a year, then you'll leave. You know,
Absolutely.
you'll leave and go to the next coach that will make some fantastic promise to you. Um, so I think for me as a coach, I really focus in heavily on as I said, I invest in people and I invest heavily in this like athlete coach relationship.
Hmm.
So for my enhanced competitors, I do the same thing, right? But I also need to like, you know, it's just I try to paint an accurate picture, and so I need to like a big part of this process is like building up this rapport and trust with them that I'm going to give them the answer that is accurate, not the one they want to hear. And so with natural bodybuilding, it's just this long timeline of like, what do you need to do? Right. So I try to provide my clients, my natural bodybuilders in particular, with multiple things. What do you need to do? Um, what outcome will that produce if you do it?
Hmm.
And then what can you accomplish with that outcome? So like, you know, you need to follow your diet and training. Here's how you do it. Here's how lean you'll get and how much muscle you'll build if you do it. Here's relatively where you'll be able to place
Hmm.
what you've done. And so like that's kind of the coaching process, right? I walk them through these steps.
Yep. It's very similar to a project plan that you decide for them.
Yes. Yeah. And you know, ultimately they get to choose the path of their career, but my option is make sure they're very knowledgeable about each path that lays in front of them.
Absolutely. Actually, then they have a realistic expectation and realistic, say, vision that whether they'll be able to do with this or not. Because it's all in. You have to be in or you don't even do it.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's bodybuilding is not sport that is for casual,
Yep.
you know, for casual enthusiasts. I think it can be to a degree with maybe you know, I think that maybe men's physique and bikini allow for some of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but you know, it's not like the type of sport where, you know, I love basketball. I played it in high school and college
Mm-hmm.
at a fairly high level in some respects.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, it's not the type of sport where you can join a YMCA league and play once a week with your buddies. You know, you know, that's not something that a bodybuilding show, a contest is a long preparation process. You know, it endures a fair amount of suffering to get to that point, and so it's not something that you can usually do lightly. Now, I do think that there's levels, right? You know, sometimes I'll have guys that will say things to me. Well, I'll say like, "This is what we need to do to be our best." You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'll say, "This needs to be done. This needs to be done," and they'll say, "Well, I really don't want to do those things." Um, I'm fine not doing those things. And usually what I'll say is that, I'm usually working with clientele. Sometimes people get the misconception that I only work with pros or I
Mm-hmm.
only work with world champion level competitors. But no, I work with a lot of first time competitors. But the people that I work with, doesn't matter if they're a first time competitor or if they're chasing a world championship, the people that I work with are all about reaching their best potential,
Mm-hmm.
both at their very next show and their show 5 years from now or 10 years from now. So sometimes I'll start working with somebody and they'll say, well, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't, they're not really asking me, how do we make this work within my life? They just don't want to do it. So sometimes I'll just say, like, hey, I think maybe you would be better suited with a coach that's more focused on fun than
Mm-hmm.
results, because I do think that there's a balance to be struck there. But generally, I'm the type that, like, the fun comes after you've reached your best. That's the
Yeah,
fun for me.
absolutely.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but I do think that that's where, like, a good pairing for a coach comes into place. Let your coach know what you're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah. Because in fact, what also happens that at that point in time, any of the trainee cannot say that you should have told me this earlier at the time
Yeah,
of
yeah.
prep.
Well,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and so I try to make that pretty clear early on. Is like our goal, and even, I always try to make this clear to my clients, because, and I think we said this early on, is like, I always say, like, victories. I would say to my clients, victories are not what we do.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of them, but that's not really what we're focused on. That's just the side effect.
Mm-hmm.
We just want to reach our best. Um, and I'm not going to name any names, but I had a client one time where he had a prep, kind of half-assed it. he
Mm-hmm.
he he didn't really work as hard. He just wasn't dialed in, and
Mm-hmm.
we made it to stage, but we didn't look our best.
Mm-hmm.
And but we won. Just happened that
Oh.
nobody really, nobody showed up at their very best, and he won. And he was shocked that after the show, I wasn't, like, over the moon happy. And I was like, he was like, why aren't you more? I was like, we could have been better. Like,
Uh-huh.
we got this win, but you weren't at your best. And then,
You are lucky.
and yeah, yeah. And so then, 2 years later, we did a show,
Mm-hmm.
and he was put together a great prep.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, great. He was uh, perfect throughout the prep. And he got to his all-time best. I mean, he looked light years ahead of where he was 2 years prior. And it just so happened that, some really good competitors showed up to this
Mm-hmm.
show. There was some questionable judging. That happens.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He didn't even make top five. I would bet he took seventh, maybe. I was so happy. I was so happy with what he accomplished. And he was like, he was bummed. He's like, I didn't even place. I was like, doesn't even matter. I was like, you brought it to this one. Like, this was what it's all about. You brought something that was, you by far your best ever. You put together a great prep. Like, I couldn't stop about how awesome he did. And so, but that gives you an idea of, like, where I'm coming from and what I'm trying to instill in the athletes. It's like,
Yeah.
you need to gauge your success by what sort of process you have executed, not by
Absolutely.
always by the outcome. Yeah.
Natural bodybuilding is actually culmination of several efforts bring brought together.
Yeah, yeah, it's a real, it's a real self-actualization process. You're trying to achieve your most efficient, highest level self. Um, where that falls in relation to the rest of the bodybuilding world doesn't really matter, because, like, you only can work with the genetics you have,
Yeah,
and so it's like, if you achieve your best self, you'll beat as many people as you possibly are capable of beating. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
that's all that really matters.
Yeah. And the beauty of this natural bodybuilding, that sort of gains that you make actually remain with you. It's not so. I have all the respect for enhanced athletes as well, but the thing that only disappoints me is that the ones, in fact, once they stop taking those anabolics, those drugs, they lose their gains. They lose their gains. Yeah, but in natural bodybuilding, that's not the case.
Yeah, yeah, you are absolutely right. It's like some of those muscle gains will stay with enhanced competitors after they come off, but a good amount of them fade away.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
one thing that Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
one thing I always say is like, I mean, kind of like with aging, right? It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
similar to aging. We all kind of have the muscle mass that we have at what testosterone level? You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? So it's like, if you're a young man and your testosterone's 8 or 900, you have that testosterone, but then as you start to get to your 60s, you're going to see some decline as your
Yeah.
testosterone maybe down to 3 or 400. So it's like, it's the same thing when you take anabolic steroids and your testosterone levels will, go up to 2000. And then when you come back to 1000, you're going to see some of that fade away.
Yeah. So just a question. Pardon my knowledge about this. In natural bodybuilding, we don't use any sort of drugs. It's just supplementation and right.
That's correct. That's correct. Every So natural bodybuilding, I say this because every sanctioning body has a little bit different definition of what is
Yeah.
natural. Um, a lot of so no drugs are allowed at any of the natural competitions. It's just that some competitions will have restrictions on certain legal supplements as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like some federations may ban certain stimulants. Like, you remember what used to be in the pre-workouts quite a while ago was the 1,3-dimethylamine. It was in Jack 3D. Do you remember
Jack
Jack
3D.
3D?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So like, I don't believe that's legally sold over the counter anymore. The 1,3-dimethylamine.
Oh.
But for a while there, some natural bodybuilding organizations allowed it while it was legal. Other ones
Mm-hmm.
had banned it. Some so like the hormone sold over the counter is DHEA.
Mm-hmm.
Some natural competitions allow it, some don't. Um, Gosh, what's another example of that is even
Igdastoron.
7 keto. What was that?
Igdastoron. Turkesterone.
I'm not. Oh, I think that's legal in all of them.
Okay.
But like 7 keto DHEA is
Yeah.
not even. It's a derivative. It's not even acting on the hormones there. But some allow it, some don't. So it's like, as a natural bodybuilder,
Mm-hmm.
be real careful about what you take where you plan to compete. So I always tell my clients, don't take anything without telling me first.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so but I think that it's good to find your own definition of it. I work
Mm-hmm.
with natural and enhanced competitors. So clearly I'm not like judging what other people want to use. I'm like, I just we're not going to cheat. You know
Yep.
what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't mind what you want to take because it's your body, but I'm not going to let you cheat.
Yep.
So make sure that your line falls in line with what the competition says you're allowed to take, and then we'll
Absolutely.
do that. So yeah, and but you're right. It is the longevity factor does. I mean, I've had a lot of natural clients actually get their IFBB Pro cards in untested shows, and the way they usually do it will be through natural competitors don't hit their peak until like 45 years old usually, and usually someone that has been using anabolic steroids for a lot of years is starting to see a decline by that time. So a lot of
Absolutely with that.
times, I've had clients be able to get the IFBB Pro cards
Mm-hmm.
through the masters shows, because the natural competitors are hitting their peak at 45, whereas the enhanced competitors have already seen some decline. So that's usually one way. When someone tells me like, I want to get my IFBB pro card as a natural. I'm like, if there's ever a time to do it, it's in those masters divisions because you're hitting your stride while they're on the decline.
Absolutely, yeah. And also in natural, say bodybuilding, comp prep, do testosterone level, in fact, remain at that level, 800, 900, 1,000?
You said in the natural, will they remain that
Yeah,
high? Did
yeah,
you say?
yeah.
So testosterone levels, and without getting too in the weeds, are really interesting because they're real subjective.
Yeah.
Is high for one person may not be high for another. My guess is that there's it probably receptors matter more than the actual testosterone level.
Yep.
So, for example, some of my perfect example, right? I'm not a very muscular competitor.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to be on the thin side of natural, even for natural bodybuilding. But my testosterone level is always very high. I'm approaching 40, and my testosterone level is always in the 700 to 800 level.
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah. I've had some very muscular clients in their mid 30s, even 30 years old, up near the top of natural bodybuilding, and their testosterone consistently comes back at 400, 450. But they're super muscular. So, once again, you could say their receptors are probably much higher than mine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, it's all relative,
Yep.
right? Is like, if I drop down, I didn't test my test levels when I was younger, but there's a good chance when I was in my mid 20s, I was probably at
Mm-hmm.
1,000 or higher. Um, but I've seen some decline because I'm 38 now. So my guess is that you're going to see, usually after the age of 25, you're just going to see really subtle decline, all the way in, probably a bigger drop when you hit your mid 40s or so. But it'll drop steadily and slowly. But I do think that there's a lot of things you can do to keep it higher. Um, I mean, a number of things you can do to keep it higher for
Yeah.
sure.
So
I don't think a lot of
supplementation.
guys,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, supplementation and lifestyle, eating healthy diet. Like,
Yeah.
guys don't understand, eating fruits and vegetables can keep your testosterone higher. Low stress, good amount of
Good
quality
sleep,
sleep.
sun,
Yeah, sun.
zinc.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
even finding the right amount of sun. Like, I'm gonna give a side note on this too with sun. Like, is I think that also finding like what works best for you as an individual.
Yeah.
Um, like they always say, like early morning sun is good for everybody. But interestingly enough, I have weird circadian rhythms. Like, if I'm left to my own devices, it feels really natural for me to
Mm-hmm.
go to bed at 3 in the morning and wake up at 11 a.m. Uh, so for some reason, early morning sun doesn't feel terribly natural to me.
Mm-hmm.
If I wait to get, I can't keep the 11 a.m. schedule because I have a 4-year-old daughter, right? She's got to get to school. I got to get up. But if I wait to get sun until like noon,
Mm-hmm.
1 p.m., I feel much better than if I get right out in the sun. And
Oh,
it,
interesting.
yeah, I feel it feels much more in line with my own natural rhythms and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Doing things like that, like a lot of lifestyle things can impact your testosterone, and even doing things that make you feel. There's some cool research on this for anybody that wants to go down the rabbit hole, but things that make you feel like a winner
Mm-hmm.
will increase your testosterone.
Yeah.
There's a lot of research that shows, like, if you put two men in a competition, they did one, right? They did one where they showed two guys. They had two guys compete in a rowing competition on a rowing machine, and they just had guys row like crazy, and they didn't actually track who won.
Mm-hmm.
They just told one guy he won. Hey, you won, or hey, you won. Whatever guy thought he won,
Mm-hmm.
spike in testosterone levels. So, if you can do things that make you proud of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to see higher testosterone. If you go to work every day and you feel like a schlub, you're like, oh, I'm nobody at my company or whatever, whatever that job may be.
Yeah.
Um, your testosterone is probably going to be low. But if you're like going into work and you're doing good work and you're like, I killed it at work today, and you go home to your wife and you tell your wife, hey, I killed it at work today, and she's like, I'm proud of you, you did great. You're going to have higher testosterone. So, like, the more things you can do that make you feel like you're valuable and like a winner, then you're going to probably have higher testosterone too.
Managing stressors.
Yeah, like if you're not happy with your life and you're stressed out and you feel like, if you're like, I'm not really that proud of myself, then you're gonna have low testosterone, certainly.
Great. So, Cliff, you have been, in fact, into this bodybuilding industry from, I think, more than, say, 15 years or so. How do you see that the industry has changed? It has changed for good, or the changes, in fact, should be in some way that can actually promote sport? Now, I'll tell you why I'm asking this, because now what I see is happening is that every young teenager who's going to gym, as you mentioned, that natural, say, results are not that easy to gain it like overnight. And anybody, in fact, exercising for, say, 3 months. And if you also see on, there is one website, Muscle and Strength. So they populate several workouts, like, and almost every workout of them is like 12 weeks, 16 weeks. And it's not possible to gain substantial amount of shred and neither substantial amount of muscle mass in just 12 weeks. So the next best option available to them is certain kind of anabolics, which is
Yeah.
either available to them through their friends or through our nearest pharmacy options or through a black market. So how do you see that has evolved over a period of time?
Yeah, in some ways bodybuilding has changed a lot for the better, in some
Mm-hmm.
ways for the worse in the last 15 years. And interestingly, I think myself and people like myself are a little bit to blame for some of the things that have gone wrong. So the benefit, right? I do think that access to information is
Yep.
so much better.
Yep.
I mean, stuff that I had to pour through scientific journals to find is like at the flip of a finger on Instagram. Like everybody's, citing studies on Instagram. So that is a great thing.
Yep.
Um, I like, I think the overall knowledge of the industry has improved. The
Mm-hmm.
average competitor has much more knowledge today than they ever did. The downsides is that I think the reasons people do this have changed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I got into coaching because I loved it, and I loved the sport. I loved the pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mentioned to you, I didn't make much money in those first few years. But that didn't even really bother me. That wasn't really why I was doing it. And,
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten to the point where I make a comfortable living now, um, doing bodybuilding, which just still blows my mind. But now I see people, they lift for a year and then they're filming everything they do at the gym. They're more focused on building their name than building their physique. They're more focused on social media fame than building a base of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they're they're more focused on trying to become an expert in the eyes of others rather than actually building expert level knowledge and experience.
Totally
Um,
agree. Yeah.
uh, a lot of bodybuilding shows have been shrinking a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
because I also think that there used to be a fair number of people that would do bodybuilding shows because they wanted to be recognized for their physique, the effort that they put in their physique. But now I don't think those people do shows anymore because now to be recognized for your physique, all you have to do is put a picture up on Instagram. And so I think that bodybuilding, I won't get too philosophical here, but bodybuilding, of course, it is um, on its surface, it is a superficial endeavor, right? We're trying to build this physique that looks good on the outside, but there is a lot of internal endeavors that take place in this process. And I think that people have stepped away from that realization. They don't
Mm-hmm.
realize that to build this great superficial package, you need a lot of internal growth.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are not embracing that concept.
Absolutely agree with this. So, Cliff, it was such an insightful say conversation with you. So, I would also want to record another podcast with you where we will deep dive into some of the exercises, do's and
Yeah,
don'ts,
that'd be
because
great.
yeah, because there are definitely overflow of information over the internet. So we'll definitely cover that as well. So, how can anybody reach out to you for coaching and also can access your wonderful book?
Yeah. So for coaching, just go to my website. It's teamwilsonbb.com.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's an application on there. Fill it out. Yeah, I have questions on there to let me get to know the people a little bit. So that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
always what I want there is that you can buy my book there if you're in the US. If you're not in the US, you can just buy it on Amazon. That's probably the best place to get this on Amazon. Um,
Okay.
and so yeah, those will be the best places to get a hold of me. If you want to see my posts, usually it's going to be on Instagram or Facebook. Instagram is CW Team Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I always appreciate everyone following along. I don't have like this massive, hundreds of thousands of followers type of social media, but I have always had a really avid following. So even though it's not massive, it's allowed me to get my word out to a decent amount of people. So I always appreciate people giving me a follow.
Absolutely. And that I have, in fact, read almost all of your posts. The information is such unique, and it's actually, in fact, no bullshit in any of your posts. In any of your posts. Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate it. I try to bring something. I don't always post as regularly as other people,
Hmm.
but that's because
Yeah,
I try to make it something actually valuable when I do post.
exactly. You want to actually contribute to anyone's life. That's how you actually start a post and write your learnings, in fact, and what others can derive out of it. Just not
Oh,
for sake of writing it.
I really appreciate that because I do try to like provide some insight rather than just a throwaway post.
Yeah. So for our listeners, what I'll do, I'll take the link of his book and post in this podcast, and also include his Instagram handle and Facebook handle so that all of you can access his account and have a great insight about what this man contributes to the industry of bodybuilding and also can contribute to your lives. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Cliff. Have a wonderful day ahead. Please take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.